thank you all for coming today to the importance of cash flow.
There's no problem. There's a solution.
That could sound very boring, and but to me, I'm a nerd, and it's exciting because if you don't have cash, well, the company's not going to go very far. So I was a student here. I graduated in 1994. We had a professor who has since passed, but Dr. Green, he was one of our finance professors, and he used to always start with debt is good. And I just kind of changed it because it's really more about cash is good. Because we're not really talking about capital structure, debt versus equity here. We can talk about it at the end, about pros and cons. But this is really more about having capital in your bank account for cash flow. So that was a little bit of my background, just to expand on it a little bit more, to put us a couple names behind it. As I mentioned, I graduated. After my undergraduate, I got an undergrad in finance from Penn State. I started at PPG, kind of moved around the country with them in different roles, and then decided to come back to Carnegie Mellon to get my MBA. Well, at that time, it was MSIA from GSIA, so my diploma looks very different than yours if you graduated from here. And when I was coming back, I had saved money because, again, finance, so I was putting stuff away. But I was very fortunate. A company here in Pittsburgh said, yeah, why don't you come back, be our manager of cost accounting, and we'll pay for your MBA. I'm like, that sounds good. And some of you, if you've been around, may have heard of the company. It was Respironics, founded by Jerry McGinnis way back in the day. So I was there for about 10 years. And with that, and with Respironics, that really opened my eyes to kind of the entrepreneurial and the fast growing. When I started, talk about different times, we were 36 million in revenue, and we were a public company. I mean, I just sit back now and I think about that. That's just crazy, because at this point it would cost about $36 million a year to be a public company with all of the requirements with regard to the IRS and federal reporting, et cetera. After there, I kind of moved around, and one of the fortunate things being in finance is I'm not necessarily married to any industry. And so I've really have been fortunate that I've gotten to move around in the different industries. But the one common thread in all of them, and that I found that I tend to gravitate to, is fast growing. And so with fast growing, I was at a company that was 100 million to 400 million. I was at 1 million to 11 million. Prior to this company, I was at actually a Tupper grad formed company called Careform. We sold it a couple years ago to Connective RX. They were actually just in the paper yesterday because I became a quasi. While I was there, we were going so fast. And when I started, I was 26 employees, and when I left 2 years later, we were 126, and I was in the midst of hiring 60 more. So it was kind of a crazy, so we were kind of in the real estate business too, because I was always looking for more space, which, let me tell you, is not always the most fun thing to do. Interesting, but not fun. So my background is mentioned. It's a lot of different industries, but it's always been fast growing, and therefore, because of that, by default, cash was always top of mind, regardless of anything else. So what I wanted to go, because I'll talk about it, some of you might have even come to this last year, but what I wanted to first ask is, I want this to be interactive. I mean, I have my slides and I have what I think is important to kind of share, but I think what's more important is kind of why did you come to here today, and what was it that you were hoping to talk about, learn about, get more clarification, or get some different ideas. Because that way, I want to write them down so I remember them going through, because during certain sections, some of them might come up. But then at the end, we can kind of go over it and make sure I've covered everything. So why are you spending your lunch with me here today? Anyone? Yes?
So I'm a professor of chemical engineering.
Okay.
And starting to look at ways to make funded centers sustainable
Okay.
in the long term,
Mm-hmm.
like past their federal funds.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just here to learn.
Okay.
And anything that might move in that direction.
horrible writing, so hopefully y'all can read that. Anyone else?
I do this. I work for a consulting
Yes.
firm, and I do it on my own. So I've done a lot of these in my past, and I'm always just looking for something I never thought of before, something I never considered.
Right.
So.
Yep. New insights, new ideas. No,
Yeah.
trust me, I get it. Yes.
Because nobody knows everything.
No. And I can tell you the model that I will show you later. I started it, God, it's hard to believe I can't even believe it's that long ago. But I started it in like January of 2008, before 2008, because we had an issue. And I've kept it, but every year it's been morphed because I hear things and pick things up.
Right.
Yes.
So I am a former business owner myself. I had a consulting business for 8 years, and I currently work with an awesome organization in which I serve as a relationship manager and transition and working with growth stage businesses. So my background has been consulting with early stage businesses and now growth stage businesses, but in supporting these businesses for other sustainable, larger contracting, governmental contract, higher ed, wanting to see a little bit more because I serve as the strategist for them when they come into our accelerator. And so I'm here to just, see where I may be able to best support them even more, especially when I work with our service deliverable partners in areas of capital and when they're looking at their financials and projections in regards to that.
Okay. Anyone else? Again, and please, as we go throughout this, just start talking, raise hands, etc. Like I said, I love cash. I love budgeting, and I enjoy how the two go together. But there's a chicken and an egg that happens with them, and so I've been doing this for a long time. So I need you to definitely ask questions if I kind of gloss over something, or if you want to dive a little deeper into anything. All right, so why did we choose that? I kind of talked about it a little bit, but this isn't brain surgery, but one of the reasons why fast and small growing companies, one of the big reasons why they tend to go out of business, it's not for the product, it's not for the lack of demand, it's because they run out of cash. If you can have a great idea, you can have the great customers, but if you don't have cash, that means you can't pay employees, you can't pay vendors, you can't pay rent, you can't pay utilities. So the reality is, you have to understand it for sustainability. The other reason why is especially, and my focus here is probably more smaller growth companies, but the reality is this goes for every company. We work, excuse me, I'm sorry, that was a little cough. If anyone heard of a little company called WeWork? Yes. The reason why good fiscal management is important is because by diving in and understanding the details, it means you understand your business. You understand the metrics, you understand what's coming in, you understand what's going out, you understand the when and the why. And what you'll see is the model I have is very detailed for that reason. Now, as companies get bigger and bigger, if we're working at a $5 billion company, there's not one person who has one spreadsheet like what I'm going to show you. But what I'm hoping is that down at each of their departments and in each of their sectors, they probably do. Because somebody has to be controlling. Some group has to understand the ins and the outs. And by having that good fiscal management, I can also tell you that when you're talking to a board of directors, when you're talking to investors or potential investors, there's a huge comfort level that they're looking at you because you know your business. So the company I'm at now is called Othot. We do machine learning and prescriptive analytics, working with higher education, colleges and universities with their enrollment and retention of students. Company's about 4 or 5 years old. We have about 30 universities across the country, including a few here in Pittsburgh, maybe one that's in and around this campus too. But we're not profitable yet. It's coming soon, and definitely the gap is coming down. But obviously, every time we budget, I have to worry about cash and where it's coming. And so I just joined the company last October. So this was my first year doing the budget process. So I completely revamped it because, again, going into creating departments, we did the P&L, the chart of accounts. Well, we presented everything to the board, and they're like, oh, this is great. But 2 comments and I'll show you a slide that I kind of showed them, a similar one. I just showed that my cash scenarios, like if we hit plan, this is what cash looks like. If we miss this, if we do this, so I was trying to show scenarios. One of their comments was, well, I really appreciate all the detail that you calculate for revenue, but I'm really just concerned you just don't understand the cash. And that's like, that to me is like the dagger in the heart. So I'm like, can we get on a phone call? Within 45 minutes, he's like, got it. Because I went through all of the detail. And so as soon as that happened, it was that understanding that he knew exactly what I was referring to. But by knowing that detail and sharing it with your stakeholders, there's just a comfort level. And trust me, when you're going to banks and when you're asking for investors, they want to understand. Because if any of you have ever asked for money, it's the infamous runway. How long will this take? And they don't want this. It should be about September of next year. Why? How? So that's what we're going to be talking a lot about today. And the other thing is, by doing this, not only is it important that you as the owner and as maybe the CFO of the company understand, you want your employees to get it, because it's their business also, that you want to understand what they're responsible for and what they're accountable for. So way back, this is my second year doing this here as a Connect, when Dave and Winnie and I were talking about different, because I've sold now a couple companies, so we also talked about, maybe I'll look at, we talked about the war room, the due diligence process. But we realized is, what I'm going to show you is actually the basis of my due diligence. It's kind of like the heart of what I do, and then everything kind of falls out beneath it. When we sold Careform, it was a private equity-owned company out of New Jersey, Connective RX. They came back and they bought a company of similar size to us at that time. And they were like, oh my God, you guys are so much easier, because we had that cash, we got it. We understood our customers, our vendors, our timing is very important to them. We talked about, I talked about this, so the reason why I can give this, especially in this audience, is I've been at $1 million companies, I've been at $500 million companies, and have used this general process. I got through 2008, 2009, our company, we missed some covenants, so we were in what I called, the doghouse in the bank world. Some people call it special assets, some people call it purgatory, some people just call it hell. So we made it through that, didn't have to do any bankruptcies. We made it through companies, vendors declaring bankruptcy on us and having to figure out how we continue to pay our vendors. Careform, we were doubling. I started at $7 million. I left in 2 years. We were on road for $40 million in revenue. So it was a constant. But this is something that I believe in, very kind of to the core of my being when you're starting a company. So, creating a cash flow. I think the last couple of days, and even over the last couple of weeks, if you've come to these sessions, there have been some talks about budgeting, preparing the business plan and building a plan. And that is where you start. You can't do your cash flow until you have a plan and until you have a budget. Because, again, you talk about chicken and the egg. Well, the budget is, as we all know, as soon as you do a budget, 5 minutes later it's wrong, but you got to put your flag in the ground. You have to do the infamous start somewhere. So the first thing you always have to do is a budget. And at a minimum, you want it to be a monthly budget. You want to understand and make, where's your revenue coming from? What is the timing of your revenue? And then timing of your costs. What are your costs of goods sold? What employees do you have? So looking at your fixed costs, your variable costs. So you can do it as detailed of a budget as you want and as you know, but that is where your starting point is. And then you can very easily do a monthly cash flow, and I'm not talking the statement of cash flows that you see in an audit. I'm talking an operational cash flow, something that you're in the engineering's amongst yourselves and the operations people can understand, not the delta between AR this year versus AR last year, AP. That's interesting to somebody. Mainly they're called CPA auditors. But from a practical and operational, it doesn't really give you a lot of information. But if you take your P&L and you look at the typical, well, if my revenue comes in this month, I generally will get paid for it next month, the month after, my costs have to come. You can do a very back of the envelope cash, and that's interesting. But what that's not going to do is help you on your day-to-day management, your week-to-week. How am I making payroll? When am I going to be running out of cash? How long do I really have? So, but you have to start with cash flow. So now, let's see how long it takes me to get this moved over here. Yep. Sorry. It's like me driving on the wrong side of the road. All right, so what this is, so this is my detailed cash flow. It's when you go through this, my view on cash flow is it's incredibly easy. It is incredibly easy. People, I think, make a bigger deal of it than it needs to be. Well, what is cash flow? What's money coming in? Where all do you get money coming in from? Anyone?
Revenues, bank loans,
Yep.
investors, whatever.
Right, so all of this, you get money in from, and then where does your money go? It pays your employees, it pays the rent, it pays your loans back, it pays, your various vendors. So this isn't a difficult concept. What is difficult about it is the discipline and the maintenance of this. And what I was telling this gentleman over here or I think in the beginning rather, I started doing this in 2008. This thing has morphed over the last, 10, 12, 30, however many years we are now. Since then, one, as I've learned things, and two, what I've realized, this can then be used to help me with other items. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to spend time kind of going through some of this detail. Now, one, ask me questions. Two, at the very end, if this actually looks really interesting and you'd like to have it to kind of play around with your own, by all means, give me your email and I'll send this to you. There's nothing, it's proprietary in the sense that I created it, but there's nothing like uniquely magical other than it's all in one place. So what I started to do is, so you can see this top part here is cash. And I'll scroll up to this kind of goes away because you don't need to see all of this. But what I also ended up using this for is from a management standpoint is making sure that are we invoicing on time? When are we expecting, is there a general sense of like, does this make sense? So I've kind of I do this kind of color coding off to the side, so kind of forecast is a little bit later. If I've invoiced something, if I actually received it, if I've actually, paid the AP. And the reason why I do that is there was something that I learned, again, early on, is I put together a cash flow based on when we're supposed to be invoicing people. So next week I was expecting to get a payment from one of our vendors for, like $500,000. Well, guess what my AR group hadn't done? They hadn't invoiced them. So I was not getting that payment next week because the customer didn't have an invoice yet. There was some miscommunication. So these are the lessons that I've personally learned over time here. So basically, how this works is, it started way back when, just doing a 13-week cash flow that I would, and the reason where 13 weeks came from is that's what the banks, the bank, it's a quarter. So basically, how much money do I have for the quarter? And also, in many cases, that's probably, especially from a customer standpoint, when you're growing, that's probably as good of a line of sight as you have. Because after that, other than scheduled payments, new customers, you know, depending on the cycle, the sales cycle, it might be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months out that you're doing forecasting. So what I want to show here, and this, I kept it, let's close this up. All right, where is that? Okay. So what this is a snapshot of is, you can see what we do. You can see all these months that have been collapsed. Those are months that are done. So you can see everything that's in there is going to be bold because those are actual. Those things happened. And the reason why originally I would do a 13-week and then I would add the next 4 weeks, drop it off. But then what I realized is, God, I have a lot of really good information on here. 1, when it came to budgeting. 2, looking at customers. 3, looking at cost increase. Just looking at different details. And so, again, this is just a simple Excel spreadsheet. I'm sure, you know, I've thought about, like, geez, could I somehow make this? I just like Excel. Excel just works for me. Other people can use something else. But there's just a lot of good data on here because this is a historical data about the company and what actually happened at your company. So for the customers, again, this is all very simple. These are all my customers, and everything that I have up in this area here is kind of the actuals. So these are customers. These are actual signed customers. I'll show you down below where I put in my forecasting stuff, like, well, what happens kind of going forward. But what you can see is we just track this. Again, this looks very simple, but we track this on a weekly basis. At the end of after a month is done, we collapse the month, and then we add another month. Now, what I then also have done, especially towards nearing the end of the year, I then start looking out for my next year. Because these are actually signed customers, I know what my contracts are, I know what my general expectations are. So I'm able to kind of go across here. I include churn, because in many cases if you're kind of a SaaS or SaaS-like business, that's a reality. Other cut places, you might want to include any concern, because there's certain customers that either don't pay or, but you can include anything else down there. I included, as we talked about, if we bring in money, I have this transfer in from money market, because whenever we would bring in money from the outside, we'd put it down in the money market, and then I would transfer up. But you could put in there, new equity, new loan amounts, new, whatever you want, because this is your cash in. So this is going to give you the picture for your history, for whatever time period you want of all the cash that you have coming in. And what this allows you to do then, at a very easy and kind of high level way, is just do the smell test. Very often what I'll do off on the sides here, I'll do a lot of, I'm a big cross-check person and verifying. So a lot of times out here I'll look at, I'll maybe do totals, I'll compare to what I have on contract files, I'll compare to bank accounts, etc. But way back when I talked about, one of the things Dave and I talked about doing, we talked about due diligence. The other thing what this does here is it forces me, when I'm entering this stuff and when I'm doing my forecast, I got to pull out the contract. I got to pull out the contract for that customer, because I need to see, well, what are our terms? What are the dollar values? So this here is based on, you can see I have lumpy payments. I try to show a couple different things. You either get paid monthly, you get some semi-payments. So the bulk of this is our annual payments. When I worked in construction, the last 2 companies that I've worked at, we've had annual contracts. So that tends to be how, for the last 15 years, I've gotten paid in these big lumpy amounts. Because when you're in engineering and construction, you usually have milestone payments, so you get a big chunk, and then a few months later you get another big chunk. But what this will cause you to do is make sure that you have a copy, finance accounting, have a copy of the signed contract, you understand what it is, you understand when it's going to end, and you just understand the details of it. Is it a 30-day payment, a 60, 90 days? Because like when I worked at Careform, our pharmaceutical companies, they just tell you when they're paying. There's no negotiating. We pay net 90. Okay, and the one was so kind to offer, they did something with John Hancock where we could take out loans to help us with those 90 days. But anyway, that's another. But those are the things that you would be up against. So by keeping this track by here, it makes sure you also have all the documentation you need. So fast forward, when you're ready to go to sale, you know you have all of that information. So when you start developing your war room, you can just copy paste that customer file into your due diligence, and that's set to go. I mean, this is easy, right? I mean, oh, yes.
So for a consumer products company,
Yes.
does that need guidance on whether or not you would want to, instead of using customers,
Yep.
use like the method, whether it's like if it's a single purchase or a subscription, or would it be by vendors, or like product line? How would you suggest for this kind of view?
For the revenue, for your revenue?
Yeah. For this.
Yeah, so, no, and that's a great question, because obviously as you get bigger, you know, this thing could be just ridiculously huge. So you're right. What you could easily do is if you had different types, so if you had a group of customers that are, you know, that they have the online subscription, so they're paying through a credit card, so you have an amount, you could easily have that group, like, hey, here's our online. But what you also want to make sure is that there's that churn line, because you have to analyze what that churn is. So then what happens is you have what you forecast, but then you make sure that, you'll see at the bottom here that I do a bank reconciliation. So you have to put in and verify your actuals, so that therefore you can, because let's say all of a sudden it's going down, then you're going to have to change your forecast. So in that case, yes, that makes complete sense. And then you might have a few vendors that are just weird, or a few customers that have their own unique, and you can list them out. What I would then obviously, and what I'm assuming would also happen though, is for your credit card detail or somewhere, you do want to have that detail somewhere. It might not be on this spreadsheet, may even be on its own separate tab. Like for example, if you're getting all those by credit card payments, you can download all that detail from your credit card and keep it in, you know, maybe have a January, February, March, April, you know, revenue file that it's just connecting to. Therefore, you can see the detail. And you can see who is churning, because I would think the next level information that you'd be interested in, who is churning? Is there any commonality between the people who are leaving, who are no longer buying? And then if you have a couple that, let's say, you know, you have a contract with CVS, you know, I'm just thinking of a retail, you know, and they do some type of payment, you might want to have them as its own separate. So some people might have national accounts. So then you'd have your national account group. Or you might have, I can't think of different types. But yes, this made sense for what I had been doing, because we had very discrete customers and it wasn't in that thousands of line items. But it would make absolute sense to be able to condense. But make sure that you have that detail and you're analyzing the details somewhere. Because, yeah, this is fine, but what you then have, I mean, that it's fine in summary, but ultimately what this is also to be used for is an analysis. So, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. So, any questions on the revenue side? So, I mean, you can see then, you know, this is everything that I was paid in each of those months by each of those customers, because they were in the bolded green. We know we got it. This orange over here says, yep, I got that 500 was invoiced. This was paid. Going forward, I see, like this would be an example of, yep, I've invoiced this. I haven't invoiced this. Is that okay? You know, how far out is that? So this is just my visual, and one of the things that we talk about this is I've had accountants who update this daily, and Monday is cash day for me. So every Monday I go through our big detail, and that's what I'm like looking at. Well, we have these things coming up. When can we invoice, or I move things around? Because, and we'll go over it. I have this scenarios button when I meet with my CEO every week, because we are keep wanting to call ourselves a nonprofit. We are not a nonprofit. We're just not profitable yet. So we have the out of cash date. So that is something I am just eagle-eyeing, and so we look at these various scenarios each time. But anyway, so this is the cash. Then going down,
How does the churn work in there? Is
So-
that a negative correction for something you didn't get?
yeah, well, so in churn in the SaaS business would be any business, any contract that's not renewed. So in other words, up above here, I'm assuming all of those are renewing. Now, in some cases, I have contracts that are auto-renew, so for some period of time, so I'm good. But other ones, we know that there might be at risk for whatever reason. So in my budget, I usually will have, in budget, we have a churn. And so the churn is just recognizing that some of those contracts may not re-sign, so you're not going to get that cash.
How do you account for new business development, future potential clients that you
Yep, I will skip, let me drop down here. So, and we'll come back up and do kind of the cash outside. I'll just want to show you where that is and then I'll drop back down if that's okay, or get back up. So what I do is, this is all this stuff up here is my actual, what I actually forecast. Then I have this section down here of kind of my budget, meaning here's what I think is coming. So in other words, this up here is my actual, like forecasted actual cash ending balances. Down below would be if I hit budget, if I get those things, then that cash gets to be added in.
Okay.
I, like probably many finance people, do this conservatively because if you've ever done it optimistically, you've gotten yourself burned. Because you assume some of these things would be hitting and then they don't. So what I do is the actual cash up above, and then I do my scenarios, not scenarios, but I do my budget forecast down below. So this is, so the way I have this here is, you know, because this is the cash side, so like these are the months that I expect it to close, but you can see I assume a 60-day cash payment. So it's closing in January, but I'm getting paid in March. So I'm assuming one new customer at $65,000. This one I'm assuming 2 new customers, both at $65,000. Then I do a sales commission, and then I have an assumption down here for estimated new employees, because this would be next year's, or this was me if I'm in the 4th quarter last year, trying to forecast out through next year. Which is this. So we'll go through in more detail there, but I do include it. But up above is always my cash in is customers I have signed. These are in-hand customers. The churn is recognizing that some of them may not renew in the next cycle. The other way you could do it is if you have a bad debt issue, you can include it in there too. So in other words, like if you have a lot of customers, and you just realize that you kind of have a 2% bad debt expense, that you don't know who it is, but you just know it happens, you may just want to include a bad debt expense line in there, just recognizing that I don't know where the money's not going to come from, but I know we have some risk.
So if there was no churn, you would end up with more cash than expected.
Exactly.
And you can correct that at some point along
Yes.
the way.
Yeah, so what I will do is, for example, great example. So we're entering our budget right now into QuickBooks because we're using QuickBooks. We identified 6 customers this year who do have an actual renewal, meaning that they have to sign something that we want to get them all. We have no interest in losing any of them, but we know they're at risk. One is already signed. One has told us they weren't, and it wasn't a good fit with what we do, so we expected that. These are still out there. Well, this one I then was able to remove, meaning I was able to remove the churn because they signed up. This one, I had it, so I left it in there. And these remaining ones, I'm just leaving in there until they hit. And then you're right, then we might find, as we go through the year, there might be another customer like, oh wow, we really thought they were, it's most of the time for us, it's not that they don't like the product, it's more that they're having other issues and it's a budget line issue, it's because from an expense. So yeah, every Monday, as I said, I look through this every Monday and I adjust everything that I know because I keep, every week you learn more things from customers or expenses, or they just signed a new, like last year we have a partnership with Slate and someone told me it was going to cost X amount. we got the bill and it was X plus, and I'm like, oh, well, look at that, so we had to obviously adjust. So that this is a living document for that exact reason. And that's why the 13 weeks has exploded, because a lot of details cite beyond that. You might have some, but they're generally a little less clear, just because.
And in your example, so if you have $20,000 here, that is a judgment of yours?
Yes,
Of
based
like-
on history, based on, now, so this was, I think, 20,000 per quarter. Now I can tell you, so this was might say the prior one. I can tell you my detail, my current one. We went through and identified which 6. So my 6 are exactly equal to that amount.
Okay.
We were initially the one company, the 20,000, the way we were calculating it, that was a pretty good average of the contract size. So we were thinking if we lose 1 a quarter, it's about 20,000. So there's some method behind that, but you have to look at, like I said, what risk factors on your customers are paying you, or if you're doing the bad debt expense or not renewing. You want to look at the size of the customers, and then you want to look at the ones that, like, you may say, you know what, I think a couple more I know these 3 are, and I might have a couple more. And so you could put that as much detail as you need to. So then the next is the cash out. So the cash out is, I just tried to do some generic. So you obviously, the big one that you have is payroll, commissions, bonuses, those type of things. Then you have kind of, these you can see I don't have necessarily vendor names, and I don't even on ours, because you have expense reports, you have things that can charge you a credit card, you have, this miscellaneous expense forecast, that's the infamous plug for the I don't know. So I usually throw in a couple thousand each week for something pops up that wasn't expected. The payroll, I do it in detail, so, whoa, look at that big. So I basically look at, my hourly employees, my salary employees, like that here. And what I'm expecting for new hires, and I just do a basic calculation for payroll. I mean, there's nothing magical. But again, by doing this detail, it's just right. Meaning, you know who your employees are, you know what you're paying them. So may as well keep that detail in here. And then down below, I have the hiring as for, who's coming on board from a customer and that timing. And then I do the old, multiply it by 1.08. The employer tax portion of it. This is not grossed up for anything else, because I have healthcare benefits being paid directly. I have, if you do a 401k, I have those other things under my vendors. This is simply what we cover for payroll. And again, I keep that detail because I found it was actually easier to do this detail to then just kind of take my current and then just randomly increase it. Because with this, I don't have to change. Now, when you get to be 60, 70, 100 employees, then that would be where, you would not do this. So like at Careform, I started out using this, but when we hit the 60, 70 hiring and people, the churn, because we had a call center, I stopped doing that detail. And I just took kind of the base, and then I was increasing it based on just stuff that I knew. It was never perfect, but because we had such a strong base, if I was increasing it, if I knew we had some product lines coming up and I increased it because I knew I was going to hire 30 more people at X dollar, if I was wrong, the materiality was just not going to be significant. But when you only have, 20, 30 employees, adding 1 or 2 new employees starts to become more significant. So I just found this was easier. The company that I work at now, for example, we hire, but because we're more of a SaaS type business, we don't have to hire 30, 40 people at a time. My prior company we did, that got a little crazy. So the cash out, you can see I do kind of 4. So the bolds are the actuals, everything else is just forecasted. When I talked about every Monday I come in, I look to make sure that things are making sense from a going forward standpoint. So you can see I have utilities, legal. Now on mine, like on our actual, we have the actual vendor names, but I was just trying to give you examples of, these are the types of things that obviously you're paying money on. Some things are monthly, some things are annual, some things are quarterly. Obviously it's very dependent.
Does somebody give you all this information and then you enter it into this?
So whenever I come into a company my first time, I pull out the P&Ls, or not the P&L, the cash registers, and I pull out all the AP and the vendor stuff, and we enter it the one time. My accountant then on a daily basis updates it as she gets more invoices in. So everything should be in here. But you can see a lot of times these numbers are rounded because we don't know. So you can see going forward the numbers are rounded, but the history of them, the historical numbers are very detailed because those are the actual earnouts. So so she's in there every day.
Okay, so not you.
I'm not.
Someone else is putting this in, but you know how to look at it.
Yeah, so I created it. I set it up initially, just like so after we do the budgeting, because again, we're not a big company, and so my detailed one for like 20, I set up the initial one, and then she manages it, correct. And then, like I said, I'm going in every week, just one to make sure that my bottom numbers are still looking good. I'm looking at my forecasting out, and I can show you in the scenarios. So then that's just your cash out. And then the other thing that we do is on a weekly basis, we tie this to the bank. The reason why we do that is so that one, there are no surprises, because we've done that before, because at some companies, if you're writing checks outside of QuickBooks or outside of your accounting system, you can get some things that were written, but then we're not in the accounting system, they get lost. So the beauty of the bank is that's real. So by doing this on a weekly basis, it just gives you comfort that you've covered everything, and you're also tracking on. The other reason why is because I want to know when I get paid. So when we start calling our customers saying, you're 30 days late. So that way, by doing this, we're making sure we're accurate, that we've caught everything. So then the last thing and that was just the money market, so that's kind of like the savings account, if you do that. If you bring in a lot of money, if you do a fundraise or you do something like that, you might want to put in something that, all right, it's not a lot of interest, but you may as well earn some interest versus have it sitting in a checking account. So then the last thing so everything up above is my forecasted costs, my actual revenue. Then down below here, this is where I then do a secondary kind of cash forecast. And this is based on what customers and what I think is coming. So this is usually based on my budget. So like the way I'm doing it now, even I'll list underneath like who I think those customers are if we know. A lot of the stuff going forward, that's just our salespeople saying that we expect to sign this many, each month. But by doing this then so when up above here, so right here where it says the ending cash, is over here? No, this isn't. So what this is saying, what I'm showing right now, and this is in 2020, that based on all of this, that at the end of this year, I would be in the hole by negative 1.2 if we didn't sign anybody. But if we sign, we're positive, not a lot, but we're positive. So this is where on the weekly basis why I'm tracking this to see where this moves, because then I do, and these numbers don't tie with each other, but it's just, this is more for a example. So when I'm meeting with my CEO and what I'm looking at on a weekly basis is I kind of run these different scenarios. And whatever scenarios work for your business, you work. But like my top one is always, doomsday. We get no more customers. And then the bottom one is we do our budget. And then we do different scenarios in between. And what I'm trying to look at is, when do I go negative? And And the reason why we do this is hopefully for a very obvious reason, is if you don't know your cash forecast and you don't know when you're going to be running out of money, do you know how expensive it is to call, to like all of a sudden go, oh my God, I got payroll in 10 days. I need $200,000. So people are about credit cards, it's expensive money. So the whole point on doing all of this is to manage it on the weekly basis, the monthly basis. The secondary is to know what's your runway. When do things go negative? Because if you know that months and months in advance, you can talk with your bank, you can talk to investors, you have time to do something. And going back to one of my first slides, by doing that, and if you go to investors and you go to bankers and say, because this has happened to me, if you tell them, look, I need X amount in 4 months for this reason, this, you see all the detail, they're more apt to listen to you and give because you knew this. You laid it out. They know that you understand your business. You understand what happened. Now, in many of these cases, it could be like, well, this is my worst case scenario. This means nothing happens, nothing signs. So, but I don't, again, as a CFO, I got to make payroll. I got to pay my rents. I have to pay all this. So I want this. These things should sign, and so if all of this stuff happens that we were hoping to happen, and we had more, I should actually be fine until July. But I have no guarantees. Whereas I know that payroll's coming; those things are coming. So the whole point of all of this that I've kind of morphed this into over my years is one. When we started doing this, it was very basic. It was knowing my cash in and cash out, because we had gotten into trouble with the bank, and so we had to show this. So that's kind of when this started. And then the engineers and my product managers realized they understood this. They got this. We also then used this. I was able to, when we had companies declare bankruptcy on us, and I was going to do the forecast, I was able to put payment plans together for my vendors with a high level of confidence, because I felt confident on when things were coming in. The vendors might not have liked that the payments took months, but I will tell you what they appreciated was the honesty, the transparency, and then every Friday when I sent that check, they were good. And we never lost it. This was when I was at Taggart. We never lost a vendor. We kept every relationship, because we communicated with them, because we could forecast out. We could see what was happening, with our business. If you don't know the details, you can't do this. You simply can't do this. You can maybe on the back of the envelope see what's happening, but when you're a small growing company, you've got to know this detail. And I am telling you, the PPGs, the USXs, the whatever of the world, yeah, they may not have this detail up at the CFO suite, but I would be pretty darn confident that at each of the department levels and in each of their smaller sectors, there's someone who understands their business, because each of those is a mini business, and then it kind of rolls up. So as I said, I've morphed this into a combination of cash. I use this for looking out at the future to see, how I'm going to pay my bills over the next few months, where my cash is going, but then also up above, am I invoicing on time? Am I, do any of these bills look weird? Do we have any surprises? Because then I can also then use this to help me the next year for budgeting.
Can I just ask two questions? So
Yes.
one is mechanically,
Yeah.
you have months and then you have weeks, and
Yeah.
there was some stub periods of a couple days.
Yeah.
How are you reconciling? Like, is the weeks flowing
These
into
are
the
all-
months, or they're separate
Yeah,
reconciliations?
so each of these, so I end every these are week ending Fridays. All
Okay.
of these were Friday end dates, so it's a week. It's an actual week. And so when in these things where it's months, they're not dead on perfect. That would mean, like if I open this up.
So it's the month as of the closest
Yeah.
ending Friday.
Right.
Okay.
So okay. Okay, anyways, this is all messed up because she has made, this is equal to the ending balance of, what month did we, of July, and then she's just adding all of these up so we can close this out because I don't want to see a weekly. So when we finish a month, we enter in a month column,
Yep.
add up all of this detail, and then just make this, that's the starting balance, which was the ending balance for the end of July. These were all the ins and outs that were added up, and then it goes into the next week. So it's just,
Okay, so it's roughly the month, but not always exactly.
it's not exactly right, and which is why we do the bank balance, that's why we do the bank balance, you know, at the bottom here. Because to try to do it with QuickBooks, right, this is not correct. This is so at the end of my week, because it's just the easiest way to try to
Yep,
keep
okay.
it going. Yep,
It may not match up with your actual financials for the month of August.
correct,
Right,
absolutely.
Because
Right,
the first day of August maybe was Tuesday of the week,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that was already.
right, so that's why we can't balance this against QuickBooks, because
Right.
there's no same cutoff date on it.
Okay, and that's sort of a good segue into my second question, which is, so this is, 13 weeks. How do you think about this in conjunction with or using with a longer term like projection model?
Mhm.
So something that goes out like 5 years.
Okay, yeah, no, it's because I don't. I mean,
Okay.
I can tell you for the most part, I try to stick to a rolling 18 months. I generally don't go beyond, and mainly because the companies that I've worked, if I could be right 6 months from now, I would be happy. We can't project out 5 years. The only way what I would probably argue on that is if you wanted to go beyond, so I have this, so I started projecting to the end of 20, probably in this time period. That's when I probably initially created this, because I realized I needed to then start going out. And basically all I was doing is was making guesses, like that's not our actual budget. Well, this isn't our actual anything anyways. But when I took it out to 20, I was able to basically take all of my detail here, like whatever I was paying vendors up here, it was generally going to be about the same each month. My customers, I knew what my customers. If I was then going beyond that, then I think you have to do it at an annual basis. Because
Right,
if you
okay.
look at that, because then you're going to have to determine, all right, if I have 30 customers this year and I expect to have 60 next year, and then you have to kind of do some math on that.
Yep.
So I only do this detail, I try to keep it at about a rolling 18 months.
Got it. So you would treat those as two separate
Yes,
models
I
for
would.
two different purposes.
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Can you show the scenarios tab?
yeah, oh, yes, sorry.
So, like, one way or another, all scenarios have red. It's just
Yes.
how far in the future.
Right.
So-
Right, so what that tells me
What does that mean?
is that we have to raise some money. And so then the question then becomes, what kind of money do we want to raise? Do we want to do capital? Do we want to do bank loan? Do we want to try to do and then what type of bank loan? Exactly, but that's what this is trying to do, is tell me far enough in advance so that if we're doing whether it's a combo or either, because they take time to do it.
I see. So this gives you a better insight of, do you talk to your bank 4 months in advance, or do you
Yep.
get emergency credit?
Correct, right, and I can tell you which one's better.
Scenario 1 is emergency credit, and scenario 5
Right.
is.
Yes.
better.
Yeah, and so just so you know, because this part is a true statement, is I started doing these, so when I joined the company in March, so I got this thing all done, said and done, I think by June. And so probably in like the September time period, that's when I got the 20 in. I've known since 20 that April was our number. And it hasn't changed. I mean, it may have changed by a few weeks here or there, up and down, but that was kind of my
So
worst
this-
case.
This is a growth scenario, and so you imagine a year from now, these numbers are all black across
Exactly, right.
by some method.
Right, and so so for example, one of the things I did for 2021, because I did do that also, is I put together a scenario that said, if we said, all right, if we want to be cash flow positive by end of first quarter, second quarter, whatever, I put that scenario together of, then this would be what our revenue would need to be, because assuming we're SaaS and we don't, so our cost to revenue isn't linear. And so I came up with some assumption with, some additional costs, but not at the same growth rate. I came up with, look, this isn't our plan for 21. This is just what would need to happen in order to be cash flow positive by, X date. And so what that was doing for us then is so that's able to help us say, how much money then do we need to raise this year to get us to cash flow positive in 21? Because one thing that is not fun is raising money. And the reason why I say it's not fun is because, I don't know about you, but I'm an operational person. I like to do the business. And the raising money part it's a necessary evil.
Have you ever given this talk to department heads at the university?
And me, no. I've done this, and I did one of Mr. Kegler's classes in the fall, but no.
They all run little businesses with this kind of stuff going on.
Who's Mr. Kelley? I don't know who that is.
Yeah, I don't know. He and I used to work together way back when at Respironics, and I was his idol, just so we all know, because he followed me here. He followed me here.
He's still here.
Yeah, you're true. And I got his son to go to Penn State, but other than that. So as we talked about, because I know we only have a few minutes left, we talked about the importance of maintaining it. And I think we talked about kind of the why. It can get away from you quickly, let me tell you, especially when you're growing, whatever. Oh, skipping a week is not going to cause anything, but what I have found is by going in and like I said, everyone in our office knows that Kelly's Monday is cash day, because that's usually when I'm sending stuff to our partner success group, like, hey, what's going on with this? When can we invoice this? This thing's late. What's happening with this? Where's the? So therefore, by me doing it on Monday, then the rest of the week I don't have to worry about it. But by keeping up on that, you just don't have the surprises, because again, what we talked about before is transparency with your investors and bankers is so key. When I was at Taggart, we had one of our owners who hated bankers. Whatever. I'm like, they're the same as investor. No, they're not. They are. They are exactly the same as investor. In shock, when you treat them as such and you treat them as partners, guess what happens? They treat you the same way. We signed up with a PNC, and this was in 2007. That was, for anyone around, that wasn't as bad as 2008. We thought 2007 was the financial crisis. That was like the JV squad of financial crisis. But we had some problems with some customers, and I forecasted out that we were going to miss some covenants. Not so much on the cash side. I mean, a little of that, but more on the the balance sheet side. But we forecasted that out, and I said, so I told them in July, hey, it looks like at the end of the fourth quarter, I think I'm going to miss that these two covenants, but at the end of the first quarter, I'm back on track. We never got in trouble. We never whatever. We did exactly what we said because we told them. And so this is the same thing with the cash. If you tell people and you're transparent and you're open and honest with them, they're going to treat you with the respect that you also deserve. So treat them with that same respect, because nobody likes surprises. Not even the good one. I mean, okay, everyone likes a good surprise, but there should be no like, oh my God, we just won this huge contract. I mean, you should have known that there was always a possibility. But usually you don't get those surprises. It's always the other. So at least with cash and having those communications, like I said, on a weekly basis with our partner success group, because they're the ones who, we just changed it to customer because we didn't like calling the universities customers. It was kind of a weird thing, so we just changed it to partner. But they know what's happening, if they're going to renew or not. And so it just keeps me more comfortable. And just, very quickly, so when you are talking about cash, there are those various options. You can grow it organic. See, how do you get more cash? We get more customers, obviously. You can, you have, if you're a solo owner, then you have to rely on your friends and your families. You have investors, you have the banks, and all of them, there truly are pros and cons to all of them. Everyone, the reason why going way back when Dr. Green would always say debt is good. And I remember initially I was like, that doesn't make sense because I gotta pay interest. Well, Sometimes owners have a different type of interest. They may not take financial interest, but they take other interests, your time, your attention. They have their own ideas. So there definitely are pros and cons, to all of this. And so by being aware and having that relationship, and like, for example, we were small, so we just did a different type of line of credit. But I'm also establishing a relationship with another bank just to set up credit card and set up new checking accounts. We were at Silicon Valley Bank, but we're moving local because I want to establish this close relationship so that in 6 months, 12 months, they know us, we know them, and then I can say, all right, now we're big enough, we have a recurring revenue of X, what type of line of credit can we get? We can marry that with additional equity, then that to me is a much more healthy relationship. But the whole point of what I've been doing is so that you have that foresight, you can see what's happening. So I don't know if I helped, to understand some of the sustainability and got any new ideas and to help in supporting growth. But like I said, this was something. It's a living, breathing document. It has changed. I'm telling you, even since I've been here for 9 months, it's changed from when I first started in June. But that's good because what that means is other people are asking me questions like, "Oh, I could do that. Or I can track that," and that just makes it easier for me. Like I said, there's no brain science. This isn't rocket science, but it is necessary, and it does take kind of diligence and constant attention. It's like growing a plant. Keep
It's
watering.
been difficult originally going from the PPGs and the Respironics to this early stage
Yes.
startup, and when to get away from the 3 to 5 year strategic plans and the 13-week rolling forecast.
Yeah, it's a big difference. But what I'm curious about though is because after 2008-9, and you do see that even the big companies had problems, they were running out of cash, et cetera, that you just wonder how much more, and again, I can't answer this, but I just wonder how much more detail they start having to get into it because they come to realize that it's not a guarantee. That your customers are not fickle, there's a lot more options, you can move around a lot more easily. But I am convinced that you would hope to God that there is somebody at the smaller level at each of those companies that are doing some version of this. You would think. But sometimes I look at the world too simple. Yes, please.
Yeah, so you mentioned this model was based primarily for a SAS model.
That's what I'm at right now.
Okay.
Yes. So it started when I was an engineering construction company.
Oh, okay.
And then I did it for Careform. And Careform, we had annual invoicing to customers. So we had some milestones. We had some, kind of maintenance revenue. We had the annual, so we had different types of revenue with them. So that one was monthly. So that was not SaaS. Company I'm at now, I call it SaaS-like because our contracts are much larger. There is a customer element. It's not, you don't just click off and you're off. So it really can, like I said, I've used it for each type of company. I just morph it to the costs are the easiest. Those are the same. Those there's nothing different on the expense side. Those are pretty much the same. It's always the revenue and how you model it out. And just like when, that woman asked before about if you are in the retail, that more and more SaaS, like, yeah, you're not going to list out every customer, but you are going to have probably a list of these recurring type of customers that you want to track. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you all. I appreciate you coming and questions. And again, if you'd like a copy of that or have any questions for me, I'll stick around for a couple minutes. So thank you all very much. Thank you.